Welcome back to the show, Tyra.
Thank you. I can't. How's it been? Like 2 years? I think it's been
It's
2 years.
it'll be, yeah, 2.5 years because you were on twice. You had a solo episode. You
Oh
were one of
yeah.
my first guests. You were like out of my first five guests. I think you were like four or five.
Wow.
And then you came back on the beginning of October to do that panel of harm reduction
That was
with
cool. Yep.
Ashley Foster. And then I went off and I did a shitload of podcasts since then. And then you have your own show now. What's that called?
Beyond the Rooms. Yeah,
Beyond
we
the
just yeah, we just started filming season 3
and
or
that's with
recording,
Dana.
whatever you want.
Dana is
Yes.
also on my show. I've had both of you on from that show, but this was pre-podcast Tyra. This was pre-podcast
Wow.
Dana. I gotta have Dana back on to tell more of her story. We talked for an hour and 45 minutes, and we didn't even finish her story.
I know, it's crazy, right? It's like it's so hard. There's so much,
There
it's so
is.
much when you try and like tell your story. And her and I were talking too about like the whole telling of your story because I was saying, back in the day when I was like in the rooms and I would tell my story, the whole bank robbery part of my story sounded a lot like it sounded a lot better and I made it sound a lot more like cooler for lack of a better word than like what was actually going on,
Well,
It
speaking of that, actually, because your first episode, I was still new to like how I do these. Now I'm like I can edit and put them out like in a quick of it, like snap of a finger. But when you were so early on, I messed up the recording audio and it cut off before you got into your bank robberies.
Oh wow, yeah.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about what happened? How long ago was that now?
So that was 2008.
Wow, time flies.
It sure does. It sure does. It sure does. Yeah, that was back in 2008. I was in a sober living in Dallas, Texas. My now husband, but then boyfriend, was still here in Massachusetts. And my parents had, sent me away because they believed he was the problem at that point, So they're like, we just get her away from him. She'll be okay. And he was coming to visit because at the sober house I stayed at, I was there for like 3 months and then I had like overnight passes. So I just signed myself out for the weekend. No, he had told me that he wasn't using because I think he was just trying to keep me because he wanted to see me do well. He didn't, he knew that I was being sober and that I was trying to, appease my parents and do what I needed to do to get back into their good graces and all that stuff. So fact of the matter was he was not sober at all. And so when I picked him up at the airport, like I could tell, like just by looking at him, he just had like this little Newberry Comics bag with like, he's like, do you want anything? I'm like, yeah, like get me some Boston stuff. So he did come through with that. He got me a couple like little Boston Red Sox, like bumper stickers and stuff like that. But when I saw him, I was like, did you bring me any? And of course, he had already done them all, so no. So that kind of just,
Done them all as in pills.
yeah, yeah. At that point, he
Or your
was,
pill
well,
phase.
he was doing, no, we were like doing both, but I think for some reason it was pills at that point. Like I asked him about pills at that point. Maybe I just thought he would just be able to bring those on the plane easier. I'm not sure why my head went to pills because I had already been doing H at that point, so I'm not sure why. But pills were always like our favorite because like he says, you know exactly what you're getting, how much you're getting, like, so even though we would shoot them, but it was just better, it was just much better than, like, we prefer that over H, to
And
be honest with you.
that's obvious. That's not obvious. It's actually why I never did heroin is because I always liked the control aspect of pills. I knew exactly what I was getting, how
Yep.
much I was getting, what I was doing. I'm not going to overdose because I know it's been 10 years of me doing these pills. I know exactly how many to do, how many to save. But heroin, you don't, especially, well, now it's pretty much just fentanyl. I mean, is
Yeah.
there
There is
heroin?
no heroin, yeah.
No, I read an article the other day that Philly has no heroin left. It's just all fentanyl and trank,
Yeah.
and it's absolutely wild down there. Um, so is okay. So you pick him up from the airport. You ask him if he has any pills on him.
And he doesn't. So then we end up like getting a hotel, and then we ended up drinking, which we don't like, we're not big, well, then I wasn't a big drinker and he's not a big drinker, you know. And it was just kind of one of those things. It was just like all we could think about was getting high at that point. You know, it's like all we could think about, because at that point, like that was only my third rehab. Like I was 22. Like I had just really gotten started versus like my husband's 13 years older. Like he was kind of on his tail end versus like I'm just getting started. Like I had only been using a needle for like a year or so, you know. So I was just like falling in love. Like to me it was such a love affair at that point, you know. Like I was just obsessed with it all. Like everything was still so like exhilarating and good. Like everything that with drugs at that point, even though like the consequences and everything with getting in trouble with my parents, like everything was still good in my eyes with the drugs, you know. This
You
the
were in
arrest
control.
some like
Well, you
I
thought you were at least.
somewhat, yeah, like it wasn't like it was just like not at the point where the consequences had gotten to where it's like, what the hell am I doing now, you know, like that was like years later. But this was like the first big consequence that I was like, okay, like maybe this is a lot bigger than I think, you know, like because like the going to rehab, even though like going to rehab like 3 times, like that was more just my parents knowing I'm getting high and making me go, you know, like it was because I'm still in my early 20s. Like I was going to college, so I was still under my parents' roof because after my freshman year I started commuting so that I could get drugs easier. You know, it was easier for me to get it in my hometown than on campus, or so I thought. I don't know, it's just the connections I already had, right?
Yeah.
um so it was my parents still very much controlled a lot of my life, so I had to go to rehab every time that they said. But it wasn't because I really thought it was a problem. Like I still thought like I was just having fun, and then when I wanted to really quit that I would, you know. But I still loved getting high, so I'm not going to quit. You know.
Yep.
um so yeah, so we're just like thinking about it. And then you also have to remember this is during a time that like my parents like super hate him, super hate him. And you know how kind of like misery loves company, and when you're using and even in early in recovery sometimes too, like everything is just so dramatic, you know, like everything is just so like so big and over the top, like all the emotions are just so. My husband and I, again, he was my boyfriend at the time, but we're at this time where we're like, oh, like we're never gonna be able to be together. Like it's always gonna be, you know what I mean? Like it's always gonna. It was just like this super dramatic modern day, like Romeo and Juliet, like junkie version. You know what I mean? Like just, um, and so I don't honestly even like remember the full conversation of how, well, no, first, sorry, let me back up. So first we're like, all right, let's just like go into downtown Dallas and try and find some shit, right?
Yeah.
So we drive into downtown Dallas, and downtown Dallas is very different than
Downtown
Boston.
Boston. Yeah.
Like even their Starbucks is like closed on Sundays because there's just not enough traffic. It's more like a busy city. Like the stuff is more like on the outskirts of it, not like right there in the mix of downtown. So, you know, we're driving around like just not really finding anybody to approach or anything. So, you know, we're just talking back and forth, and you know, we don't have enough money to get back to Massachusetts, you know. And so we're just talking, and it's like, well, maybe you should just go back home, and like I'll just stay here. And then, you know, it just gets back into that again, like we're never going to be able to be together. Life is always going to be so complicated. The whole world is against us. It's just you and I against the world, like, you know, gassing each other up in that kind of way, you know, just making it extra over the top. And again, I don't remember the exact conversation, but I remember pulling over, and I remember my husband getting out of the car, and like I was around the corner from a bank, and he comes out, he gets back in the car, and he sticks his hand down his pants and pulls out like a big wad of money, you know? And I was like expecting, helicopters and police and like, Hollywood type shit.
Yeah.
And none of that happened. So I drive back to the sober living, pack a little bag, and then we drove back to Massachusetts, met our dealer. And at that point, we're like, okay, well, now, like, that was almost like, now talking about it and thinking about it, like that almost was like our excuse to just say fuck it to everything that there came after, because it's like, okay, we've already fucked up real bad now, so
Yeah.
let's just go balls to the wall. And the intent was to just get as fucked up as we can, have as much fun as we can for a few weeks, couple months, whatever, and then just overdose and die together, like, again, the Romeo and Juliet, like, because the whole world's against us, and now we have this big robbery thing over our head. And it was just like, balls to the wall. And then we ended up robbing 3 more banks when
Along the way or afterwards?
no, all when we were in Massachusetts. So like we did the one in Dallas and then 3 in Massachusetts, and they were all pretty close together. And it's funny because when I used to tell this story when I was in AA, it was like a few weeks, right? It was like a few week bank robbery spree. And in my head, like realistically, I thought it was at least 2 weeks. And then I was cleaning out some paperwork, and I was like looking at the dates of, like, the first bank robbery to the last bank robbery, because we got arrested the day after the fourth bank. It was like 8 days. It was a little bit over a week long. All of that stuff happened. And it's like, when I really took a step back and realized, like, my husband went to prison for technically an 8-day run. He went for 9.5 years for an 8-day run. Like, it just makes me sick to my stomach. You know what I mean? Like, but we really were at a point where we just didn't want to live, and the plan was to die, because I don't know what it is, but there's something about when I'm using, like, death is so appealing, and I romanticize the fuck out of it. I'm not like that normally, but when I'm using, especially like once, like, I just got to a point where I'd say that is when it took the turn for me. That's when it was finally like, this isn't fun anymore. Like, this is not a good time. And, obviously, the day that we got arrested, my husband knew something was wrong. That's the part that sucks, like when we were calling our dude, because it was actually our dealer who gave us up to the police, you know? So we're calling him, he's supposed to meet us, and like my husband's like, something's not right. And I'm like, why? He's like, just, and like, cause dudes always take a long time. Like, they're always like 5 more minutes. I'm like, so like,
Yeah, five more
so,
minutes.
yeah. So I'm like, what do you like? But he's the one who's actually on the phone with them and listening to this stuff. And he's like, no, something ain't right. And then I remember at one point he's like, well, for one, he said he's on his bike, like his motorcycle, and he's like, and there was just complete silence behind him. And like, how are you going to be, especially in that day and age, there was no Bluetooth, thing. Like, how are you going to be riding your bike, your motorcycle, and talking on the phone? Like, just, little things like that. And I remember Moosh said he was there. So we're like, all right, we're going to go out to the garage and meet him. And my husband gave me some of the money, and he said we're going to split up, because, like, again, his bells were going off in his head that something's not right. And so I was going to meet him around the other side of because it was an underground parking garage at a mall. And so he was going to meet me around. He was going to just walk around and meet me, like, as I'm coming out, So I'm walking to the car. All of a sudden, I just hear this yelling. And I, like, look all around, and there's a bunch of people with, like, plain clothes, but, like, they have guns drawn, And I'm like, it doesn't compute for a second. Like, for a minute, I'm like, do they maybe know we have money? And so, like, they're trying to rob. Like, it didn't, like, it took a second, And then they all, like, rushed me and, like, threw me to the ground and, like, screaming on my face, where is he? Where is he? Where? All this shit. And I'm like, oh, like, this is for real. Like, we're getting busted. Like, this is it. And so while I'm down there, like, they stand me back up, and then out of the corner of my eye, I see my husband start walking down the ramp of the garage. And then I just see 2 big SUVs, like, rush him, like, they all get out of the car, they throw him to the ground, and that's when I knew. I was like, this is not good at all, And I remember, I don't remember a whole lot, but I remember seeing, like, they let my husband smoke a cigarette. He was cuffed, but he was smoking a cigarette before they put him in the car. And I just remember, like, the cigarette just kind of like flopping down because he can't have it, his hands on it. So it's just kind of hanging. I remember they put him in the back of the car. But the thing that they said before he got in the car, they said if, and I don't know why they said this, but they said, if you give us the same address for where you live as he just did, we're gonna let you go. I'm like, all right. So I gave him my parents' address, because what other address would he give? So they put him in the car, and then 2 seconds later they arrest me. And I remember at the police station, like, I remember at one point I was in the like in the booking, like where I was doing my fingerprints and like taking my picture, and they were like, oh, don't let him see her, like make sure like they don't, don't let him know she's here. And I didn't really like know what that was all about, but I think later it was because my husband was just like, leave her alone, like I'll confess to everything, like she's young, she's never been in trouble before, just let her go. And the people he was talking to was the FBI bank robbery task force, so like he was talking to like the in like some other police department. And then the people that I was in the room with was a Belmont cop and a Watertown cop, because those were two of the towns that we robbed a bank in, you know. And I mean, the feds didn't charge me. They didn't. Like, they kept their word, but the state did. The state charged me for the gun. And in Massachusetts, that's a mandatory 18 months. Like, you can't earn good time. You have to do the full year and a half. Doesn't matter if you have no record. Like, it is what it is. So it was either like, if I just go in and plead guilty, I'm automatically doing the year and a half. So it's like, might as well fight it. So I was out on bail for 2 years. And from the day we got arrested, like, my husband was in and he didn't get out until 9.5 years later. But for me, I was out on bail for 2 years fighting it. And I was really bad off during those 2 years, because that was every single court date. Because, like, I didn't really know how the courts went. Like, I didn't know, like, you fight this stuff for like, you go back and forth for a long time sometimes. Like, I didn't know anything about any of this. And so, like, it was almost like just an excuse in my head for me to just, it's like, well, I'm probably going to prison anyways, so might as well just get as fucked up as I can. And even though I was in and out of programs that whole time, like, my mom just had me in and out of programs, in and out of programs, in and out of programs. And then so there was actually, this is actually crazy. So the first time we go to trial, I'm with a court appointed, like, just, what the heck are their names? I can't think of it. The free attorney. Why can I not think of their name? The one that
Okay, yeah. So it's the attorneys that I want to say public defender.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so I had a public. It just came to me. Yeah, I'm like, why can't I remember this? So I had a public defender, and on his business card it says, like, immigration law. I'm like, wonderful. So he, like, is not a not good criminal attorney. And I remember the day of the trial, he says, are you nervous? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, me too. I'm like, wonderful. And he's, like, young. He's not old. He's young. Like, so the trial starts. I don't remember much of it, to be honest with you. I was doing a lot of benzos at that time. But during one part, the judge goes, counselor, to my judge, do you know what you're doing? Okay. At that point, my father stands up and almost gets thrown in contempt, but is like, we need a new lawyer. He's like, with all due respect, and, like, the judge is like, blah blah, she's an adult, you can't. And my dad, I remember at one point he said to the judge, he goes, with all due respect, Your Honor, you just asked him if he knew what he was doing. And so I don't know how it happened or what had happened, but we ended up being able to, get a new court date and get a new lawyer. So my dad ends up paying for a lawyer, which I really wish he didn't do, but he did. And so he paid for a lawyer. So we go back a few months later. This time there's a mistrial, right? So in this time, the jury, they go out, they come back, they can't make a decision. So it's a mistrial. So the judge is talking to the DA and my lawyer, and he's like, I mean, this girl has no record. Like, you guys can't work something out. But unfortunately, I was just really not doing well during that time. And I had been a person of interest in a couple of other things. But I had learned my lesson from my first, well, I wouldn't say learn my lesson because I would have still probably gotten in trouble with the gun being in my car. But I learned after my first real interaction with the police that if you don't tell them stuff, like if you don't tell them what you're doing, like if they're asking you questions, they don't have enough to arrest you, right? Like if they can arrest you, they're going to arrest you. But if they
Yeah.
need to sit and talk with you, like that means they don't have enough to put you in jail right now. And I look, like
That happened to me. They watched me leave my dealer's house, and then they followed me, or he followed me, waited till I was in the school zone, and pulled me over, and called another cop for backup so he could search my car. And I was like, "There's weed in the center console, just so you know." And I was like handcuffed, and I wasn't on my back. I was just cuffed in the front. And then I was wearing a hoodie, and I had them up my sleeve. You know what I mean? Like I had my
yeah.
sleeves up to my elbow, and I had them in my sleeve, and my sleeve was really loose, and it started to fall. So the cop like picked my sleeve, and it helped me out. And then once he did that, he goes, "Oh, we found it. We found what we're looking for." And there was like 20 pills in a bag. And they were like, "We're going to get you with intent to distribute in the school zone." I was like, "Whoa, you pulled me over in the school zone. I bought these somewhere else. And
Yeah.
I was going to use these somewhere else for myself. I just have a big problem." Like, so what you're saying, they weren't asking you enough questions. So what did you do?
So like I remember one point I was at the police. I had showed up to my job. This is for one of them. I showed up to work and there was a police officer there, and they asked me to follow him down to the station, which is obviously willingly, So I followed him down the station, talk to them, and because I felt like I had to, because like kind of caught me off guard, and I'm still in my early 20s, and that was like really like my second real interaction with the police. But I knew once I was in there, like when they were like asking me questions, I could tell they're trying to make me incriminate myself. And I knew there was no cameras. Like I knew there was no way that it could be proven. So I was just like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about. And they're like, aren't you already out on bail for this and blah? And I was like, yeah, I am. And I'm doing good. Like I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, which was a total lie, But I'm like, you think that I would be getting high when I'm facing prison? What are you, crazy? And they're like, well, we're going to come this weekend and arrest you at your parents' house. I'm like, okay, like see you then. And I knew they weren't, like it was just one of those things. If they could get me then, they would have.
Keep it, yeah.
And then there was another incident that like they were actually calling me. They even showed up at my work, but I wasn't there that day, and they were calling me trying to get me to come down, and I didn't go, and like nothing came of it because again they didn't have enough. There was nothing that they could do, but I was a person of interest, and like these were in towns because it's so stupid the way that we robbed banks like in the town that I grew up in, and then also in the town that I hung out in, So some of the police that I was a person of interest in were also police witnesses for my trial thing too,
Now,
that I
did
was already in
he go
trouble
in?
for.
Did he
Hmm?
go into these? Did he go into these other banks with like a note and a gun, or did he go in with
There
the
was
gun?
no gun, no gun. We unfortunately we had just purchased the gun the night before we got arrested, and I almost think that's why our dealer ended up calling and saying he knew about where we were, because I think maybe he got nervous because we were then the next day we wanted to buy a large amount, and then we were going to just take off because we're like, we got to get out of this area. It's getting hot. And I think maybe he thought we were either going to try to rob him or something. I don't really know. Part of me thinks that's might be why he did that, because he was making out so good on us doing that shit, like he was getting all the money
Yeah.
from the banks. So um yeah, so then at the try so the DA's like, no, like, from coming from my boss, like the head DA, she's like, because of this shit, like there's no deal to work out. Like there's nothing, they're not going to reduce it to a lesser charge, because they would have to reduce it to a lesser charge because it was a Mando. So there was just, they weren't doing it. So then I go back, I think it was like a month and a half later, have another trial. And this time, like, the jury was gone for, it felt like 5 minutes. I'm sure it was longer, but it felt like 5 minutes. And my dad, I didn't know this till like they came to visit this summer, but he said from that mistrial, he had hope, like it gave him hope, like, oh, like maybe, she'll get found not guilty. And I didn't have that hope. I mean, I kind of did, I kind of was like, well, maybe, maybe it'll happen again. But they came back and they said guilty. And because, again, I was just getting the 18-month Mando, they weren't adding anything. They cuffed me up right then and just took me. I didn't have to go back for sentencing or anything. I remember looking back and like seeing both of my parents crying. Like it was, terrible.
This podcast is also sponsored by BetterHelp. If you are looking for therapy and not able to get something right away locally, you can do that with them. Within 48 hours, you can find a therapist to get on telehealth with you. I mean, I haven't heard anything but great things from people that have already done it, that watch my show or listen to my show. If you're looking to get 10% off your first month, you can go to betterhelp.com/MJsPNPMCA. That is betterhelp.com/MJsPNPMCA.
Terrible, terrible, terrible. Bad shit.
Yeah, because they had that sliver of hope that may be a mistrial again, maybe this, maybe that, and bank robbery was a huge issue around the Boston area around this time. Like they made that movie, The Town, based on, you know what I mean, bank robberies and armored truck robberies that were going around, and I think one of them happened in Watertown.
Yeah, like one of my brother-in-law got arrested right around the same time for doing bank robberies. Then my best friend, she got arrested. Like everyone was doing them during that time. It was just, everyone just was like, the buzz was they have to give you the money,
Yeah.
And like my husband grew up in Charlestown, so it was just like, that's second nature to them, That's second nature to them.
That's what it is. The Town took place in Charlestown.
Yeah.
And I watched a documentary called Heroin Town, USA, which was based on the Cape Cod, when people in Massachusetts say on the Cape. But yeah, they were, they would go into Boston to buy heroin and then take it back to Cape Cod to get high. And in that documentary, they were just like following these lives of people in addiction back. And this was like over 10 years ago. Like I remember watching this when I was in addiction, going, well, that's never going to be me. I'm never going to, because you know how it is. You're like, they're never going to catch me. I'm just going to do it. And it's just, especially when you're on, opiates, you're already thinking you're untouchable.
Yeah.
No matter what you do, you're untouchable. You can outsmart them. Like, look how smart I am to make this money every day. Like, no one's going to catch me. I'm way too smart for them. Now, were you in, like, constant contact with your husband when he did the 9.5 years?
No. We stayed in contact, like, the first year. And then, like, he was moved around a lot. And then I was, like, in and out of sober living and everything. And then I went to prison. So for, like, 2 years, I stayed in contact with him for, like, the first year. And then I was, like, going in and out of all these programs and stuff. And it just, we lost contact. And then I went away for my 1.5 years. And then I got out with this, like, changed woman. My past is behind me type thinking that lasted about a month. And then I started getting high again. And but so I didn't talk to him after
18 months. Were you getting high in jail?
No.
So you went the entire 1.5 years. Did you have to kick when you went to jail?
Yes. Yeah, that was terrible. That was absolute hell. And I kept telling myself, I'm like, it's mind over matter. It's mind over matter. It wasn't. It wasn't.
Nope.
And I remember I'm really lucky that my first Like my first month in there, I had a really cool celly, you know, like she was, because you know when you're dope sick, it ain't pretty. And
Yeah.
you sure as hell don't want to be in a little cell with someone who's dope sick. That's for sure, you know.
Yeah.
But she was super cool about it. But I remember, like, you know, I wasn't eating obviously, and I remember like seeing this bowl of rice, and I had seen it there for like over 24 hours, and she was, and I'm like so weird about food and like food safety and like all that kind of stuff. But being in prison, I got over it a little bit. But I was like just
You kind
thinking
of have
about
to.
how this unrefrigerated food, and like luckily most of it's all preservatives, you know, like yeah, it's meat, but it's like summer sausage that has a bunch of like salt and preservatives in it, so it's not like a piece of hamburger that's been sitting out for 24 hours, you know.
And frozen Salisbury steaks reheated up.
Yeah, it was like, but she's like, you gotta eat, and I was just like, no, no. But yeah, it and I was super emotional. Like I don't know if it was just like from being in prison, but it felt like it was like the detox. Like I had no control over my emotions. Like every time I would try and get on the phone, like I would just cry. Like I was so emotional. And then, you know, I just got into a routine, got to know my people, and it wasn't that bad. You know, it really once you get over the initial shock of being there, and once you know you make a few friends, you just, you know, you make the best of it. Like I remember having some like of those hardcore like hurt your stomach about to pee your pants kind of laughter that I hadn't had in years, you know, that I had in there, and it was 100% sober, like pure real emotions, like real
Yeah.
genuine heartfelt laughter. And you know, you go through a lot
I
of ups and downs in there.
Yeah, I did. I noticed that early on in recovery too. Like in addiction, I was a comedian and I was laughing a lot, but when I got sober, I actually felt the laughter in my
Yeah,
stomach. You
right.
know what I mean? Like it
Mhm.
was legitimate laughter. And it's
Mhm.
something that still to this day, 6 years later, I think about, how that initial laughter, and I still laugh really hard and I'll cackle and whatever. But I remember those belly laughs early on and being like, oh, okay, this is funny now. Like I can laugh at some shit.
Yeah.
But you got out and you didn't learn, you went right back to using again.
So I was working at a restaurant. I got a job at a restaurant at On the Border, and you know, just you can, I don't know how we always find each other, but you know, people use and always find other. And I just, you know, this dude, um and one day he asked for a ride, and I was like, yeah, if you give me some. And just was that easy, you know? And so I had been away from, you know, my husband now, and like he wasn't my husband at the time, but, you know, hadn't talked to him in years. And I ended up actually hooking up with the dude that he met to like get, get the shit. I ended up, hooking up with the dealer guy, but at the time, I didn't know how bad off the dealer guy was. You know, like he was just literally someone who sold to support his habit. Like there was no extra money that was just strict, but still, I mean, I was high 24/7. You know, like it felt like the best of the world, but it was also just like, you know, literally rolling over and just like having a shot and doing a shot right then and there, like not even having to like worry about getting sick. So we did try to get clean a couple of, I hate saying that word, get clean, but sometimes for lack of a better word, I don't know what to say. We did try to, you know, get off drugs a couple times, but it was just, it didn't work. You know. So again, my parents intervened, sent me back to Texas, and I ended up living in Texas for like 4 years sober. Well, not sober. I ended up developing a gigantic alcohol problem, but it didn't feel like a real problem because everyone around me was drinking just like me, you know? And it was like, you know, I had a good job in Dallas. You know, I had to go to rehab again and like all that stuff. But then I slowly just started building my life again, you know? Like then I got to the point where I got my own apartment. And then, I started dating this dude and who I actually ended up getting engaged to. And, the party, like we had a really big party life, like going out in Dallas life, like everyone just, going to all these different bars and like expensive ass drinking, type of nights. But it didn't feel like, I know in the beginning it was like I kind of annoyed them because I was like drunk. I remember even one person was like, "How old are you?" Because I partied like a 21-year-old, but I didn't have that bar experience when I was in my
Yeah,
early 20s
if
because I
I'm
was,
mistaken, you started on pills when you were in high school.
yeah, my
And then
senior
so
year.
by the time you were like 18, 19,
Yeah,
you were already up to dope. And so like you were very much an early bloomer. Like you did not wait around. But also when you're getting high like that, you're not really drinking because you don't want to
right.
spend $10 or $20 on drinking. You rather that go towards a bag. And
Exactly.
you're not going to drink that much. And did your parents know that you were like drinking at all? Because like I remember my
They
parents,
found out.
yeah, my parents were like, "Oh, drinking's no problem. Like, we don't care if you drink." And because
Oh,
they
my
didn't
parents
know
did.
that. Oh, did they?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They got really upset about. I remember it was actually one day they were moving me from one apartment to another, like they were helping me move because my parents had ended up moving to Texas too, and they still live there now. And so they came to help me move, and I had been out drinking the night before, and they could like smell it coming out of my pores, and it was this big long conversation, and I was like, I got to be honest with you, I've been drinking for the past 2 years, and you've been saying I've been doing great. Like you've been so proud of me. You've been saying I'm doing wonderful, and I had been drinking for that past 2 years. So they weren't happy about it, but they kind of just were looking at my life and was like, well, what can we really say? Like, and my mom definitely still would give me shit, but she couldn't give me a ton of shit because again, I mean, I wasn't dependent on them for anything. Like they weren't having to pay for me to live somewhere in some sober house. I wasn't in and out of rehab anymore, and they had spent, so many years dealing with that. So they finally were just like they were like, whatever. But yeah, I had a really like hardcore drinking thing for 4 years, but it was just I hung out with a lot of hardcore drinkers, and so it didn't seem like it was a really big problem because there were plenty of people getting just as drunk as me. And again, it was so exciting for me because I didn't have that bar scene. And so I was living it up. And so then fast forward, I get a message from my friend, and she is like, "Hey, uh, Chris is out." That's my husband's name, and I'm like, "No, he's not," because I was looking up on the BOP. So at this time, I'm engaged. Okay, I'm engaged to this dude from Dallas, whose name was also Chris, but uh, so she was like, he's, and I'm like, and I looked up on the BOP website, and I was like, nope, like it still shows that he's in there. So she like ends up yelling at, she's like, whoever you are impersonating Chris, like he's gonna kick your ass when he gets out. And he's like, dude, like it's really me, like blah blah blah. And so finally they end up talking, and she's like, no, like it's really him. So I end up sending him a message on Facebook, and I'm like, bro, like what the fuck? Like you're not even gonna say, like it was just like I didn't even think about it. Like it was just like instantaneously she told me he was out, and I sent him a message, and I was like, you're not even gonna say hi, bro? Like you're not gonna say nothing. And so it took him, so he's been gone for 9.5 years, so he's not like super technology savvy. So he was like scared to like kind of respond because he didn't know like who would see it because he had looked me up, and what he said, he's like, I saw you were doing good. I saw you were engaged, and I just thought it would be best to leave you alone. And I'm like, well, no. No. And it was like all, and I remember it took like a week because he went to a federal halfway house. I think it took like a week or two before I actually could hear his voice, like where he could like get out and make a call. And the second I heard his voice, I knew I wasn't gonna marry that guy. I knew it. I knew it. And me and this guy, like we didn't have like the relationship that we had was just kind of like, because we had a small business together, like doing some credit stuff, because that's how we had met. We had met working at a place, and he had done sales and I had done the back end, and it was kind of like, well, we could do this on our own. You do the sales part, I do the back end, and that's what we started to do. And so, it was more of a business relationship, like it became that. And I remember I said to him one day, because we were having like a destination wedding in Mexico, and like people were starting to get ready to, book their tickets and book their rooms. And I remember he came home from the gym and I was like, "Hey, I need to talk to you." And I said, "I just don't like, this isn't love. Like, this isn't the fairy tale. I just don't think we should get married?" And he was like, "If that's how you feel," like he was just like, so. And like that right there, it told me, okay, like, because in my head I was like, well, maybe if he, and like this is toxic, but it was like, well, maybe if he, fights for me a little bit or something, I'll see. But didn't care one bit. So I was like, all right, well, you know, that's that. you know so then of course, I tell my mom, and now she thinks I'm getting high or about to get high. Like, she thinks something real bad is going to happen, because any little thing with my mom, I mean, even if I talk to her on the phone, like, I have to sound like happy, like, because she senses anything other than pure joy in my voice, like she thinks I'm going to go get high. Even 6 years later, she's still like that. Like, all these years later, she's still. And honestly, in her mind, I don't even think she knows about the small relapse I had. So in her eyes, it's been more like 10 years and she's still like that. Um so yeah, so then my husband's in the halfway house, and so I was his non-indicted co-conspirator, like, on his paperwork. So we didn't know if from the halfway house if they were going to let him, like, because the plan was for me to move back, from Texas back to Massachusetts, where he is in this federal halfway house. So, we start talking to the people at the prison, and they start, seeing if we can get together, and like if he can actually come to my house. And because I hadn't been in trouble, like, they were gonna let him come, you know. And so I get an apartment, I put the deposit down, packing all my stuff. It gets sent back, only for 3 months, but there was, because it was a small altercation that is really fucked up and was not his fault. And the guy who actually was the reason that he got sent back ended up getting fired like a few months later, because this halfway house was just like the worst ever. Like, they set those guys up to fail. 100%. They set those guys up to fail. So I come back to Massachusetts, and I'm like, he's supposed to be here, but he's in prison. So now I'm just, waiting for him to get out, and, visiting him on the weekends, because they had just sent him back to the one in Rhode Island. So it was only like an hour and a half away. So I'd visit him on the weekends, and he just had to stay there the 3 months. Like, he had to max out whatever his halfway house time was supposed to be. And then I picked him up from prison, and then it was tough to adjust. Like, we had been away for so long, and he, just him coming out of prison is enough. And then just all the stuff of, relationship stuff. But we both ended up going to therapy, and we worked. I'd say the first year was kind of tough, but now, I mean, we have like a healthy ass normal relationship. I use cannabis, and he takes Suboxone, and that's just kind of what works. But really, like, neither one of us, like, kind of how I've changed a lot probably since the last time that we talk, is that before, when I would talk about cannabis, I would really talk about cannabis and recovery, and thought like I had to tie it to recovery. Like, I had to tie my cannabis use to recovery and be like, it's medicinal for me, which it is 100%. But if I'm being 100% honest, most times that I partake in cannabis, it's just because I like the way it feels. Kind of like in the Big Book when it says alcoholics drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol.
Yeah.
I smoke weed essentially because I like the effect produced by weed. And before, I was so afraid to say that as someone who has a past heroin addiction, right? Because we're not supposed to be able to ever enjoy substances ever again. It's like, that's a big no-no in recovery culture. But I've really come, I've done a lot of reading. I've been doing a lot of deprogramming, and we can get better. We can heal. We can move on, and that can be part of our past. Not to say that I don't have a bunch of mental health stuff going on, because I sure as hell do. But see, this is the difference. Like now I'm actually working on it versus if I was in the program still, all of these things that I'm going through, I would be told, "Oh, that's your disease. That's your disease trying to take
You'd
you
be
out."
you'd be internalizing everything.
Yeah, yeah. If I even told anyone I was feeling that way, right. And if I did tell someone, it would be about writing 10-step inventory and praying to remove my defects of character because my disease is trying to get me versus like, no, like this is your ADHD and like that's why you're struggling here, there, and there. You know,
Yeah.
it's two totally different ways of healing. Like now I feel like I'm actually attacking the problems because even we say it in the rooms, the drugs are but a symptom, but yet we focus all of our work on the addiction and not this. Like I feel like a lot of us self-medicate with drugs, not everybody, but most people self-medicate in some sort of way, like they're using the drugs for something,
Yeah.
right? And like that's something we never get to because we're just, oh, like you're an addict, you're selfish, you're self-centered, you got to work on this, that, and the other thing, but we're never getting to the root cause of why we're actually using drugs. So of course we're going to keep using because we're not learning anything different, we're just staying in this cycle. And before, I really did think, even when I left the rooms, I still thought like addict for life. You know, even when I didn't believe in 12, I'm like, you're always going to be recovering. There's always going to be a chance. And not to say, like, I don't think that there's never a chance that I can't develop another addiction. I'm not saying that. But my old addiction is not waiting in the corner for me to fuck up, you
It's
know?
not in the parking lot doing push-ups.
Exactly. Exactly. Like there could be something new that develops, but it's not my old, like that would be a new problem that I had that developed. It's not the old one waiting to get me. And it's really refreshing and like powerful to believe that because it's really depressing to think for the rest of my life I have to worry about this. I have this monkey on my back ready to take me out at any minute. Like that was really hard for me to live like that. And I always ended up picking back up. And I also feel like a lot of the 12 step stuff was a self-fulfilled prophecy, even if it was just certain ways, like, I would go out and drink or go out and smoke a joint when I'm in the program. And it's like, I'm not getting a white key tag or picking up a 24-hour chip for a joint. Like I'm going to make sure, and anyways, this is going to set off the phenomenon of craving anyways. So I'm just going to go and get high. Now, whether I use that as an excuse or whatever, but imagine instead of being told like this is what happens when you put a substance in your body, you lose all control. It's now you are powered by this drug. Imagine if we were told like you can still make sane, rational decisions even if you're using drugs. And when you were talking about your use of the OCs, because you knew exactly what they were, that's harm reduction right there. That's you practicing harm reduction in your use and making rational, sane decisions to keep yourself alive while using drugs. It
Yep.
can be done, but we're made
Yeah.
to believe that drug addicts are these crazed, rabid, who have no control, just, hide your purse type thing. And it's not like that.
No, and it's not like that. And I use cannabis, in my recovery too. Right now I'm on a break, just because it's almost like I want to see how long I can go. And, I'm in therapy. I have a psychiatrist too. I'm doing all the things that you're supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
And, I want to try just to see how long I can go and just like challenge myself, because now if a problem arises, I can actually attack it with a sane, totally, sound
Yeah.
mind. So, my wife still uses it and she needs it for her recovery because she has MS.
Right.
So, she does need it. And I don't need it as much. I need it more for my mental health stuff, which I'm already on medication for anyway.
Right.
So I double dip. So that's kind of
Yeah.
why I'm on this thing of like, well, I'm saving money and I need the money for food and rent. And that's the important thing. So I can save money. So it's one of those things where there's a couple different reasons why I want to see how long I can go.
Yeah.
But if I end up smoking again, I'm not going to be like, well, I'm going to go get high again. I'm going to go drink over it. Like, it's not even I'll have 4 years, February 29th.
Nice.
That's 4 years away from alcohol. And then April 25th is 6 years away from opiates.
Nice.
So, but I have a bunch of different dates because I relapse on Ativan. and I'm prescribed Ativan, but like there was one night, and I don't remember any of this because benzos will kill your memory. I did a lot of them, enough to where my wife noticed something was up, and counted my shit and realized that like a lot were missing out of my script. And she called me out on it, like we're supposed to. We're both in therapy, so we both know, like, call each other out and stuff. So she called me out on it. We had a conversation, and now she holds on to my Ativan. And when I say, hey, this is the reason why I'm asking you, this, that, and the third, she'll be like, okay, I'll grab you one. And they're locked up, and she'll take one out, and she'll mark the bottle, like, there's 75 left. However, I have no idea how she marks them. I haven't seen my medication in months. So I have like 3 different dates that are important to me. I'm not just going to reset my clock and get all in my head. I have my alcohol-free date, I have my opiate-free date, and then I have my clean date. And if I stick without smoking, January 31st was the last time I smoked weed. And it was my first time in a week because I was broke, so I couldn't buy any. So like I went all week without it, and I'm like, well, if I can go a week, and then I was like, well, it is the end of the month, so I might as well start fresh February 1st. So I am going to smoke a bowl or 2.
Yeah.
I'm going to go out on a high note, literally.
Right. Yeah, I don't even know I know it was 6 years in January, because when my husband got out, we did use for a short time, but we were just like using on the weekends. But then we were like trying to do it around his probation UAs, but we got caught a couple, like 2 times. And then his PO was like 3 strikes, you're back, And if he went back, he could do 3 years. So we're like, all right, like, let's just, like, we don't need to do this. We're not physically addicted to it. We're just doing it on the weekends right now. But it did start being like, Saturday, Sunday, then Saturday, Sunday, Monday. And it was like, so we stopped. And that was 6 years sometime, in January, 6 years ago, and
That's
we don't know.
How my works today is like I intermittent fast. So like I eat between 12 and 6, and I can't drink coffee during the morning because I use a lot of creamer. So that's considered not fasting. So like I'll have a pick me up at noon. I'll grab a cup of coffee. And earlier it was like 11:50, and I poured my cup and I had it in front of me. And it was like I kept checking the time. My wife's like, "It's 11:58. You can sip your coffee." And I was like, "No. If I cheat myself this one time, next thing you know, tomorrow it'll be 11:50, and then it'll be 11:30. And next thing you know, it's off the rails again, and I'm not fasting anymore." So it is that addict mindset of, well, if I give a little to get a little, then I can give a lot to get a lot. And it's that same kind of mentality that I have with fasting, because like I have a problem with overeating. Like I'm not a big guy for no reason. Like this didn't just happen. So that's why I'm doing this intermittent fasting, is because I need to lose weight and I need to be healthier in how I live my life. So I'm doing this now, so I can't cheat because I know what happens when I cheat, and I just give up. And I just give myself to whatever like substance. But I know you got to be out of here, and I'm so glad you came back on and told your story because like I said, half of your story was gone on YouTube. Now, where can we find your show? On YouTube?
So the podcast is on pretty much all of the main like podcasting things, like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google. And then just like my regular social media is Burn the Stigma. And I do have
that in the background.
Yeah, that's what you can't really see it that good, but yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
My husband did that for me.
Like he made that? Like
because he can draw, yeah.
Oh, that looks really cool. I like the graffiti look of it. Like it looks really cool. So if you want to follow her on Instagram, it's Burn the Stigma, all one word. And Beyond the Rooms is for audio, and it's for Apple, Spotify, Google, whatever you're listening to. Because I know how that is. They put it out like 10 different platforms, but the main 3 are Apple, Spotify, and Google.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Tara. You're awesome. I'm so glad to have met you years ago, because we met because of cannabis.
Yeah.
And now
it's crazy how many. It's like been years, dude.
Yep. It'll be
We're both
3
still
years.
out here. We didn't go back.
Nope.
So
Still
it's
the
good.
same. Exactly. Like we're living proof that it's been years and we can just pick up where we left off and not have to like use again and not have to drink again, because
Exactly.
drinking is a problem for me and I know where I go when I drink. So, but thank you again. I'll let you go.
Thanks. I can't wait to listen, and I went to catch up on your podcast, so I'm
Yeah,
excited.
there's plenty of episodes. I just hit 150 the other day.
Wow, dude, that's awesome. Congrats. That's awesome.
Thank you. I'll talk to you later.
All right, bro. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.